Welcome to Shir haShirim class number 30. Whoa, the big 30. We're going to dedicate tonight's class to Minya Hinda Bas Devora for a Refuah Shalema, and also Anina Malka Bas Hila Hinda. And we're going to go ahead and jump right into it. Spoiler alert, I'm streaming on two platforms, so bear with me as I share my screen on both of them. Here is a screen share on StreamYard, and now I'm going to share it on Zoom. Because I don't think the Zoom people can see what I'm sharing on screen. Yeah, on screen. What is it called? StreamYard. Oh, this is overcomplicated. Okay, I'm going to try this again. I'm going to unshare this for a moment. And try to redo this. Okay, now I'm going to try again on Zoom. So what happens when you have too many tabs open? Okay. All right, Zoom people, you can see my screen, yes?
Yep.
Okay, great. Great. And StreamYard people, you can see my screen as well, yes?
I can't see the.
That's right. I took it off. You see, I'm zerflogen this way. I'm going to put it back. Now you can see it on StreamYard, right?
I can.
Okay. Excellent. Let's get into any questions before we start. Okay. Anything lingering? We'll just go ahead. So we are in Song of Songs, chapter 4, verse 11. And we'll read it in Hebrew and translate it. No fes titofna sifso sa'ayich kalo, divash v'chalav tachas lishoneich, v'reach salmo sa'ayich kireach levanon. I apologize for my voice. It's not in the best shape right now. So what this means is, when someone just joined us, whoever you are, welcome. What this means is, I can't see who joined. What this means is, nofes is like a honeycomb or a very sweet, special kind of a honey. And it says, nofes titofna sifsosayich kala. That means your lips are dripping, titofna sifsosayich. Your lips are dripping with honey like a honeycomb. Your lips are like a honeycomb dripping with honey. Kala, O bride. Divash v'chalav tachas lishonech. Honey and milk are under your tongue. V'reach salmosayich, and the smell of your garments, kereach levanon, are like the smell of Lebanon. Now, until now, we were talking about Lebanon being like literally Lebanon, but this place of whiteness, which we identified as the temple, the Beis HaMikdash before, because it's the place where our rabbis tell us that our sins were whitened because of the atonement that was offered there. However, over here, the word Lebanon is being used differently, and Lebanon here is being used in place of the word Livona. And Livona is a spice, which my friend Menachem told me is frankincense, right? Right, Menachem?
That's what Art Scroll said.
Okay. So Livona is frankincense. I don't know what frankincense smells like, but it's apparently fragrant and pleasant. So he says the fragrance of your garments is like the fragrance of frankincense. Now, again, just to set up the context for anyone who hasn't been in the past in the class, when we're in the Shir haShirim, the Song of Songs, we have two characters that are speaking to one another in love song. There's a man and there's a woman. The man represents God and the woman represents Israel. So here is God speaking to Israel and saying these things. Your lips drip with sweet honey like a honeycomb, O bride. Honey and milk are under your tongue, and the smell of your garments are like the smell of frankincense. That's the plain translation here. would have to open up the allegory of what all these things refer to on the national level, on the larger macroscopic level of God and Israel. What are these different images? Okay, so any questions until now on this translation? Okay, have I experienced any technical difficulties yet? By the way, if everyone could mute unless you're speaking, because I'm concerned there might be some background noise. I'm not sure if I'm hearing some background noise over here. So far, so good? Okay, fine. So let's get into the commentary if we're all ready for that part. Let's go. Rashi says over here, okay, he tells us that nofes is the sweet honeycomb. Fine. Now, what does it mean? What is the meaning of the imagery that your lips are dripping with sweet honey like a honeycomb? Says Rashi, this refers to ta'amei Torah. It's really, really beautiful language. Ta'amei Torah literally means the tastes of Torah. That's what the word ta'am means. However, if I ask someone who may know, when we speak about Torah in the terms of ta'am, what are we talking about? In Hebrew, what does the word ta'am mean in reference to Torah? Anyone familiar with this language? Because ta'am literally means flavor. And speak up if you want to say. Ta'am in Hebrew literally means taste or flavor. But when we talk about Torah, there's two meanings of the word ta'am. There's something called ta'amei hamikra. Ready for this? Everyone hold on to your seats. Ta'amei hamikra literally means, again, the tastes of the scriptural passage. But what it refers to is the musical cantillation notes. Now, again, not everyone here necessarily can read Hebrew, but those of you who are familiar with Hebrew writing, you can see there's a bunch of things happening in the text. There are letters, there are consonantal letters, like here, nun, the first letter is nun, the second letter is fe, the third letter is taf, and then there are vowel points, vowel marks. So this nun, this first letter, nun, which makes an N sound, has above it this little dot. And the dot is an O sound. So when I see the nun with the O dot, I know this syllable here is no. And then I have the fe, which is a f sound, with the three dots underneath it, that little triangular set of dots is an eh sound. So fe with eh is fe. No fe, and then the last letter tuf or suf, depending on your dialect. So the word is either no fet or no fes. Okay, but what I'm doing is I have consonants, vowels. But wait a second, Rabbi. You told me that the dot up here is O. And excuse me, I teach first and second graders how to read Hebrew. So I'm sorry if I'm sounding a little elementary right now. But let's hear the pieces. You told me, Rabbi, that this dot up here means O sound, O vowel. And the three dots underneath here are the eh vowel. But you never told me underneath the nun, there's like a little macaroni, a little elbow macaroni noodle with a dot inside of it. Everybody see that underneath the letter nun is a piece of elbow macaroni with a dot inside of it in the curve of the elbow. What is that? It's not a vowel. You're right. It's not a vowel and it's not a consonant. So what is it? That is called a musical cantillation note. That is a sign to the reader that he needs to sing this syllable with the tune da 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 da. That's the tune that's represented by that symbol. So when I read it, I said no fes. Okay, and you have these. Here's another macaroni noodle. Here's another macaroni noodle. This one looks like a wishbone. These different symbols, aside from the vowel marks, are musical notes. These musical notes are called, I'm giving you a very basic breakdown here. These musical notes are called ta'amei hamikra, which means literally the tastes or the flavors of the scriptural passage, because the music gives a flavor to the passage beyond just the phonetics of the words. So here, when it says that your lips are dripping with honey, delicious honey, like a honeycomb, Rashi says this is referring to ta'amei Torah. One meaning of ta'amei Torah, the tastes or the flavors of Torah, could mean the music of Torah. That means when a person reads from the Torah with the tune, with the musical tune, like we do in shul, or a person reading in private can do, this beautiful sound of the musical tune of the Torah is like sweet, sweet honey on the palate of the Almighty who listens to us chanting these holy words. That's one meaning. I'm not sure if Rashi means that. The other meaning of ta'am, some of you might have heard the concept of ta'amei ha-mitzvos. Has anyone here heard of ta'amei ha-mitzvos? Ta'amei ha-mitzvos means, again, it literally means the tastes of the commandments or the flavors of the commandments. But when we say that in Hebrew, the euphemism means the reasons for the commandments, the reasons for the mitzvos. So, there's a mitzvah in the Torah not to wear wool and linen mixtures in your clothing. Okay, Torah forbids wool and linen mixtures in one's clothing. Why? Because God said so. Mystical reasons, spiritual reasons, only God knows. Okay. However, aside from just saying the commandments I perform because God told me to, I don't ask questions, I don't need to know why, God said it's good enough for me. As it turns out, there is a praiseworthy undertaking, which is to study the mitzvos and to understand logical, rational reasons for them, and that gives more depth and meaning to them. Even though we acknowledge that the reasons are really much deeper than we can fathom and way beyond our knowledge because they come from God, they have a divine root, a divine source, but nevertheless, we can still find in the commandments rational, what some of my teachers called it is not reasons, even though ta'am is used as a synonym for reason, benefits. So it's like flavors. The mitzvah is not only good to do because God said so, but it actually is enjoyable and beneficial, like tasting something delicious, because I have an understanding of some positive benefit that I'm getting from it. So in the example that I gave you of wool and linen mixtures, why should one forbid wool and linen mixtures? One reason that I read from Rav Avigdor Miller Zatzal, he said, is because there used to be a fellow named Cain, and he brought an offering to God of linen. There was another fellow, his brother, his name was Abel. He brought to God an offering of sheep. God accepted the offering of Hevel, and he rejected the offering of Cain. The jealousy that ensued caused Cain to murder Hevel. Now, I'm not saying caused as in it was beyond his control. He made a poor choice, right? But what led to it was this unfortunate interaction of the sheep offering and the linen offering. So now when we mix together wool and linen, it's a symbol for murder. Wool and linen combinations based on this unfortunate event in the Torah become a symbol for murderous confrontation. And because we want to distance ourselves as much as possible from any thoughts of murder, we don't put on ourselves this combination that is a reminder and allusion to such a horrific sin, because of the sheep offering of Hevel, from which derives wool, and the linen offering of the flax, I should say, the flax. We didn't bring linen like cloth. He brought flax plant. The flax offering of Cain, from which derives linen. Right? So that's called, that type of a deep dive and understanding of a rational reason behind what otherwise would be a mysterious commandment is called a ta'am, a flavor of the mitzvah. But not only that, any explanation of the Torah, when we give explanations for a thing, those are called ta'amei Torah. It's reasons and explanations and explications of Torah material, ta'amei Torah. So when we study Torah and we learn Torah and we bring out ta'amim, reasons, explanations, rational explanations for the Torah, these are called ta'amim, these are called flavors, these are called tastes. But says Rashi, that is what's being depicted here in the allegory of the delicious dripping honey from the lips of Israel, is when they study Torah and bring out reasons and explanations of the words of Torah. Good? Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that incredible? Ta'amei Torah, the delicious reasons and tastes of the Torah is the dripping honey from the lips of Israel. Now, moving on, we have honey and milk is under her tongue. Rashi does not offer any explanation of those words, which it seems in Rashi's typical way, sounds like he's seeing that as an extension of the previous phrase. The dripping honey from the lips, the milk and honey under the tongue, all that is different depictions of the delicious expressions of Torah learning that come from the Jewish people. We'll put a pin in it and we'll come back. You know what? Let's do it right now. I looked in the Targum because I wanted a little more. And let me see if I can scroll down to it in the notes. It's a little choppy because my computer is slowed down much. So here in the Targum, that's the Aramaic translation, he translates that phrase of milk and honey under the tongue as this: B'malalusech shirin v'sushbechon, when you express songs and praises, misikin, it is sweet, they are sweet, kachalav udvash, like milk and honey. So according to the Targum, this phrase here of the milk and honey under your tongue is not just expressions of Torah wisdom, but it's expressions of praise and song to God. Okay, that's another meaning there. And then finally we have, and this maybe is why I said what I said, the smell of the garments is like the smell of frankincense. What is the smell of the garments? Says Rashi, mitzvos hagunos hanohagos b'sal mosayich, fitting commandments which apply in one's clothing, such as, he gives the examples, tzitzis. Tzitzis are the fringes, that we append to the corners of our garment in accordance with Torah law. So this is a mitzvah that applies to our garments. Techeles. Techeles is the blue dye which many people use to color their tzitzis. I don't do it for reasons that are a little bit too deep of a dive to go into. Plainly, the practice of putting the blue dye in the fringes fell out of practice when the dye factories were more or less destroyed by Arabs around whatever century, 7th century, 8th century, and we haven't had access to the process and even necessarily knowledge of the creature from which this dye was derived. And so among Jews, the ability to put the blue dye in the fringes was lost for many centuries. There have recently been those, and there are a number of different opinions of a rediscovery of this creature from which the blue dye derived. And some people follow different customs of which dye to put in their fringes. There's no clarity on the matter, and because there's no clarity on the matter, many of the poskim, many of the halachic authorities have held back from instructing people to do it because we're still not quite sure how to do it correctly, and we'd rather wait until that knowledge is revealed to us by God at the right time than do it in a mistaken fashion. So I follow those views that say to not use any of the new innovations in techeles dyeing. I'm not critical of anyone who does choose to use any of these dyes, but I'm just explaining what this is. So techeles is another, the blue dye is another aspect of mitzvahs that apply to the clothing. Big day kehuna, the garments of the priesthood, is another set of commandments that regard special clothing. Again, We don't have a active priesthood in the temple today because it's non-existent at present, and therefore we don't have a fulfillment of this commandment, but it is there in the Torah. And finally, Isur Sha'atnez, the prohibition against Sha'atnez, which is wool and linen mixtures. That which a Jew refrains from wearing wool and linen mixtures, so that I know that the clothing I'm wearing is free of any wool and linen mixtures, is a fulfillment of this commandment, and it gives my clothing that I'm wearing right now, aside from my tzitzis, whether or not I have the blue dye in it, my clothing is giving off a delightful, beautiful fragrance to God because I refrain from wearing wool and linen mixtures. Okay, we good? That's verse 11. Any questions on that? Okay. I'm going to go. If you have a question, you want to unmute and speak, please go ahead and unmute and speak. I'm just going to check on the StreamYard over here. Everybody's good on this side? Dr. Velvet, thumbs up. Okay, Cliff, everything okay, I hope? Okay, juggling tonight. Let's move on. Stop me at any time. It would be my dream if we finished the chapter tonight, finishing chapter 4 on class number 30. We have a few verses left, and our track record's not too quick, but we'll see what happens. These are not easy verses, but what's happening here is God is praising the Jewish people, praising the Jewish people, praising the Jewish people. He says this, I'll read it with the Ta'amei HaMikra now, with the tastes of the music of the Torah. I mispronounced it again. Gan na'ul achosi chalo, gal na'ul mayon chosum. That means this. Gan na'ul, you are like a locked garden. A gan na'ul, a locked garden. Achosi chala, my sister, O bride. Gal na'ul, you are a locked gal. The question about what a gal is, Rashi offers two explanations. He says either a gal means a pool of water, like over here in the purple text here, Rashi compares it to the words gulos ilios, which means the upper pools of water, these pools of water that were on a high hill. Gulos ilios. So from the word gulos, he wants to say gal is maybe a pool of water, a reservoir of sorts. So you are like a closed off reservoir. Another explanation he offers is that it is a sha'ar, it is a gate. A gal might be a gate, and he brings that from the Aramaic, this phrase troku gale, which means lock the gates. So maybe gal over here means a gate. It's a locked gate. You have a locked garden and a locked gate. And there's reasons to prefer each one, because again, this is Hebrew, not Aramaic, so more likely to be the Hebrew cognate than the Aramaic cognate. However, the problem with the Aramaic, with the Hebrew cognate, to say that it's a pool, is that it seems to be the exact next phrase, because he says, then mayon chasum. Mayon chasum, again, chasum is another word for sealed. Chasum means sealed, and a mayon is a spring. A spring of water, a wellspring, so a natural spring. So he's comparing her to a locked garden and a sealed off and enclosed spring. And then this middle phrase of gal, which is either also a pool of water, and then why the repetition, or it means a gate, a locked gate. A locked garden, locked gate, closed off, sealed off pool. Okay? What is the meaning of this? Any comments or questions before we look at the commentary on that? Okay, no comments. We're gonna go ahead. He says like this: the gan na'ul, the locked garden, is a representation of. He says al shem tznius benos Yisrael. This is a reference to the modesty of Jewish women. She'ein prutzos ba'arayos. They are not promiscuous in involving themselves with illicit sexual relations. So because Jewish women are chaste, that chastity, that sense of modesty and distance from promiscuity is praised here as she's a garden that is locked. She is a gate that is locked, or a pool that is locked, or a wellspring that is sealed off. Okay, any thoughts on this? Because that's basically the end of Rashi's comments. And in my thought process, I needed more. I needed a little more over here, because you have these three different phrases. You have the garden, you have the gate, and you have the pool. So are these all the same? Really? Are these all the same? Rashi's like, there's just three different ways of expressing the chastity of Jewish women, the modesty of Jewish women. That's it. Anyone have any thoughts of why they would, why there's three different phrases and what each one could be different from the other?
Maybe it has something to do with fertility, or perhaps, like entrance. I wouldn't know, but maybe it's all tying together somewhat the way that Rashi is explaining it.
He does seem to be seeing them as synonymous, but I wanted to think a little deeper to make them more nuanced in the difference between one another. So,
two of the three are references to forms of liquid or water. One, you said was like almost a spring. One was a fountain. I'm just wondering if there's any specific significance to that those two descriptions of Sneut are paralleling in any way.
Good.
And maybe in some way it does relate to the fact that a garden does in fact need water to be able to grow. I don't know. I'm just, I'm reaching. I was also just on a completely separate issue. The term my sister, my kala, seems a little strange, depending on where you come from. I don't know. Some people may have strange marriage practices, but generally those two don't go together. So I was just curious if you had thoughts on that.
So I'm gonna refer you to an earlier class. I don't remember the number, but I do remember that it's chapter 3, verse 11. So if you go to the YouTube channel and you look at the playlist, you'll see the title of, or at least the thumbnail says on it, Mother of God, Song of Songs 3:11, because she's described in that verse as his mother. And so we were just trying to discover, why does God describe Israel as his mother? And in Rashi's commentary, he mentions many different familial relations that he calls her, among them sister, mother, and daughter, all of them, right? So what is the meaning of each of those we went into in that class? So I'm going to refer you back to that class. Fair?
Oh, absolutely. My bad for missing it.
Rabbi?
Okay. Yeah. Who's talking? Cliff?
Yeah, it's Cliff. I was just curious. During the days of ritual impurity, Jewish men and Jewish women refrain from having sex, right? Until they go to the mikvah, which is, as was just mentioned. And I wonder whether or not that's part of what's being talked about here when they talk about a Mayan Khatum, that this is a period, this is something specific to the Jewish people, and one of the most beautiful aspects of our people. And I was just curious as to your opinion about
So
that.
you and Menachem, I know you guys are very good buddies already in the class. So Menachem was hinting at this because he says, water is something with water, there's something there. And I'm like, And Cliff, I think you really hit the nail on the head. We're going to see in the verses coming up, there's going to be more references to water, and Rashi's going to tie it all into the mikvah. It's going to tie it into the mikvah. So although he doesn't say it here, it does seem to relate to something that's going to come up where Rashi does comment to that effect, right? The mikvah, the ritual waters through which a woman purifies herself after a period of menstruation, when a man and woman are obligated to separate. So very good. I wanna just bring your attention that we're gonna come to that. So one thought I had on here, and I'll leave it at this, because I don't want to take up too much time with it, was that these three descriptions, in the picture in my mind, are like three concentric levels of closeness, where the garden is sort of on the outside. The garden surrounds the property. And then you have the gateway, the gal, Rashi says, the gateway, which is within the property and leads to something within. And then inside that, you have the Mayan Chasum, the sealed off spring. It's like the spring is what we're protecting. The spring of water is the innermost area. You have a gateway around it, and then you have a garden around the property. And so you get concentrically closer towards the middle. And while I also want to point out the Targum here, that it says, where Rashi says it refers to the modesty of the women, look what the Targum does. The Targum says this, Uneshayich demisnasbon leguvrin tsnion. That means your women are married to men who are modest. The women are married to guvrin tsnion, to modest men. So it seems like the Targum is focusing on the modesty of the men. Rashi is focusing on the modesty of the women. But I think when we talk about modesty, the reason it's so important is because usually we don't think about modesty of men, because we think, a woman's body is very evocative and a man is very easily distracted by a woman's physique. And we tend to emphasize her obligation to dress in a modest way. And so, of what importance is modesty for a man? Now, what's interesting, if we look at halacha is quite concerned about a man covering his body. There are halachas meaning laws regarding how a person should get dressed, going so far as to suggest that a person should dress himself underneath his blanket for modesty purposes. And there it doesn't have to do with sexuality at all. We tend to think as modesty going with sexuality, but you see that modesty has much deeper meaning than sexuality. Modesty is a character trait that has to do with my own sense of just humility and privacy, but not necessarily only in the realm of sexuality. So that a man should also dress himself underneath his blanket so as not to arrogantly expose his flesh. And the halacha does seem to be concerned with a man wearing clothes to his elbow and covering his knees and his feet. Person shouldn't be barefoot. Now, a lot of that does have to do with societal norms. The halacha does concede this in a country where people normally walk barefoot. There's no problem walking barefoot. And so on. And you can make the case for short sleeves and maybe short pants even. However, the point of modesty is more to do with the person's character traits, so that the person who's held up highest in the Torah, the most modest of all human beings, was Moshe, who reached the highest level of prophecy that was possible, to the point that when the verse in Psalms, and I don't know the exact citation by heart, says Kol kivuda bas melech penima, that the entire glory of a bas melech, of the daughter of a king, a princess's entire glory is penima, is inward, and it's meant to be a reference to modesty. That is to say, and I will elaborate on this, that is to say that the point of modesty goes far beyond a fence against sexual misconduct, which Rashi seems to reference over here. The modesty of the women, they're not going around and being sexually inappropriate. But you see the Targum says the men are modest. Modesty is a characteristic that is, when it has to do with dress, is about de-emphasizing the physical, de-emphasizing the material, de-emphasizing the body, and emphasizing the soul, emphasizing the intellect, emphasizing the character, emphasizing what's within. We want to look at a person, and we want to see a person as who they are on the inside, not who they are on the outside. So the clothing comes to cover up the body so as to de-emphasize it and emphasize the soul. So we let the head stick out and the face show. We don't cover the face because the face is the window into the soul. Now, the Nesivas Shalom, I wasn't sure I was going to say this, but the Nesivas Shalom talks about tznius in this way, modesty. And again, I'm talking about modesty in character, not specifically in the realm of sexuality, although that's an element of it. And again, that covering oneself with clothing is not specifically sexual either, or to avoid sexual sin. Because the Nesivas Shalom says the covering up of something, the hiding of a thing, is an expression of the value of the thing. That which is most valued will be hidden away behind many layers of coverings and guards and security to make sure that nothing damages it, nothing taints it, nothing steals it away. Your most valued possessions you put in a safe, combo lock, in the closet somewhere, behind a hidden panel, behind the painting, and you have to twist the head of the little statuette on the desk there, and the bookcase moves aside, and there's a pole there. You go down, you turn into Batman. But whatever it is, in other words, the things that are most valued, the things that are most precious, are the things that we keep most hidden. And he gives an example in the Jewish world. He says, what's our most prized possession? What's the most prized possession of the Jewish people? Is the Torah. He says, what do we do with the Torah? We roll it up, we wrap it up, we cover it up, we put it in a closet, we shut the door, we close the curtain. We've got so many covers on this Torah. You know why? Because it's really precious. And something that's really precious, we want to keep very, very much protected. So he says the idea of tznius is not like some people would think, chas v'shalom, that there's something dirty or shameful about the body. Just the opposite. Because if you look at the Shir haShirim and you look at the language of intimacy that's expressed in the Shir haShirim, and the way the language of the beauty of the human body, of the physique, how he praises her body, how she praises his body. Someone entered the class, welcome. So you see that the body is something praiseworthy. It's something that's representative of these very lofty qualities that we're expounding on, and that the intimacy in the relationship that's expressed here in Shir haShirim, all over Shir haShirim, and a lot of the language is very sexual. And even in the verse that we were looking at with the sweet taste under your tongue is evocative of the action of a deep kiss between a man and a woman. So even the pictorial representation of sexuality as it's used in the Shir haShirim is an allegory for spirituality. It's an allegory for our relationship to God. And our marriages, which are meant to be very fulfilled sexually, if we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, then become a microcosm and an allegory for our relationship with God, which is also supposed to be intimate and ecstatic. So the idea of tznius is not to shame anybody and say there's something wrong with your body and there's something disgusting about it. Just the opposite. It's so beautiful and it's so holy and it's so precious. Don't cheapen it. Don't cheapen it. Who would take, the dollar bills out of their wallet and throw them out in the street like they're worthless? You keep it tucked in the wallet. You keep it tucked in a pocket where nobody can access it, right? That which is valuable, you guard over it. You cover over it. So the idea of tznius is to emphasize the beauty. It emphasizes the beauty. And all that ultimately is meant to relate back to something spiritual. So there are many aspects of tznius that I just revealed to the idea of modesty, but here the idea that the Torah itself is something that we treat with very great modesty. And we only open up the Torah and reveal it when we're engaged with it in study, in reading, which is an act of intimacy between us and God, as we see the delicious taste of honey that drips from our lips when we study the Torah, right? This is an intimate embrace. Then it's appropriate to unclothe the Torah and engage with it. But when that act is complete, what do we do immediately? Immediately, we roll it up and we cover it, and we put it away. We don't leave it out. That's not what you do with something of such great value. You cover it and you put it away. And that's the idea of one of the aspects of modesty, is to emphasize the beauty and the value of the human being. Don't cheapen yourself. Okay, I said a lot on this subject. There's the concentric boundaries, the garden, the locked garden, the locked gate, and the within it is the pool. So what I really meant to be talking about over there is to say that there are many types of modesty, as we've just spoken about. There's modesty in your actions, there's modesty in your speech, and there's modesty in your thoughts. And I thought maybe these three concentric layers are the different manners that we can express our modesty, with the outermost of the garden, which is perhaps either the way we dress or the way we behave. Modest behavior, modest dress. You have speaking in a modest way, which could be maybe that's the gate, because our mouth is called a gate. You know that when the Torah says shoftim v'shotrim titein lecha b'chol sha'arecha, you shall place judges and shotrim and officers b'chol sha'arecha at all your gates. So on the literal level, yes, we have to have judges and officers to enforce the laws in our cities. But the Baalei Musar, the great ethical teachers, say on a deeper level, it means the gateways of your person. Your body has orifices, your body has openings, and you need to guard them from what goes in and what goes out. You have ears that you shouldn't use to hear the wrong kinds of words. So you have to guard them, which is why God made your fingers sloped so they could stick in your ears and keep out the harmful words. You have eyes that shouldn't look at certain things. So you have eyelids to close them. You have your guards, your officers, and your judges over there. You have, so it says about your mouth, regarding the orifice of the mouth, God gave you two guards. You have a teeth that you can shut and your lips that you can shut, because the idea of speaking badly about others is so abhorrent in Judaism that there God gave you two sets of doors. There's two locks, like we have over here. You have two gates over here, or whatever. You have the locked garden and the locked gate. But so speech is maybe the second level, the more internal level, beyond the garden, which is the actions or the dress, the external. You have speech, which needs to be modest. Maybe that's the gate or whatever that second expression is. And then within that, you have the pool, the wellspring. I thought maybe that's the inner thoughts of a person, that even within a person's thoughts, he should be thinking in a way that is modest, both in terms of character, humility, and also in terms of not indulging in inappropriate fantasies. So that was kind of a thought I had about these three concentric levels: the garden on the outside, the gate within, and then the pool that's within that is our external actions and clothing, our manner of speech, and then our thoughts. All that are different manners of modesty that are being praised by God, and those are virtues that we should try to achieve for ourselves. Okay, let's move on. I said too much already. Any questions or comments before we go ahead? Okay. Next, here I grouped 3 verses together, right? Verse 13, 14, and 15. And let me just check on the StreamYard, folks. How you guys doing? Good? Here we go. like this. Shelachayich pardes rimonim im piri migadim kifarim im niradim. That means shelachayich. Rashi tells us what this means is, and those who learn Gemara might be familiar with this. There's a type of land that's called a beis hashlachin. A beis hashlachin is a dry field that requires watering. In order for things to grow, the owner of the field has to water the field. There, as opposed to, there are other types of field that it's called a sada beis habal. A sada beis habal literally means a field of the master of the house of the master. A field of the house of the master is a field that gets its own rain. You don't have to water it because it gets rained on. But a beis hashlachin, which literally means a place of sending, is a place where you have to bring the water to it and you have to water it. So he's saying, shalachayich, your dry lands, which are less favorable for planting, are a pardes rimonim, are a orchard of pomegranates. The praise is even your driest and least quality of lands is so beautiful and so fruitful and so fertile that your driest of lands is a orchard of pomegranates. Im pirim migadim, together with not just pomegranates, but pri migadim means like sweet, delicious fruit. So it's a orchard of pomegranate trees with sweet, delicious fruit. Kifarim im niradim. Now, kifarim and niradim, we had kofer and nerd are these different spices that we encountered before. I don't remember the translation of kofer that we said before. I know we said it's the henna plant from which the henna dye comes as kofer, and nerd is spikenard, but both of these are described in the Shir haShirim as fragrant spices with a pleasant fragrance. So in your fields over there, you have orchards of pomegranates, you have delicious fruits growing, and you have these very fragrant spices growing in your fields, and that's in the least of your fields. So that's the praise. Even the lowest quality is so good, so good, so good. Let's go on with the literal translation here. Nerd v'charkom kaneh v'kinamon im kol atze levona mor va'ahalos im kol roshei v'samim. Now he's describing more fragrant spices that are growing in our fields. Nerd, again, spikenard. V'charkom, and I looked this up. Apparently, this is turmeric. Charkom, okay. Kaneh, I'm not sure what that is, except that kaneh in English, if you take the letters of kaneh, a kaneh, it literally means a reed in Hebrew, but it's more than that. Kaneh, if you phonetically spell it out in English, is C-A-N-E, which spells cane. In English, C-A-N-E, cane, and that's what it is. More, in other words, the English word cane, C-A-N-E, is really the Hebrew word kaneh, which means like a sugar cane, right? I think that's what it is, because the next word is v'kinamon and cinnamon. It's like sugar and spice, right? Kinamon, kaneh v'kinamon is growing there. It's delicious. Im kol atzei levona, with all the trees of Levona, we said frankincense, myrrh, va'ahalos, I think ahalos is aloe, if I'm not mistaken, im kol rashei bisamim, together with all the best kinds of spices, rashei bisamim, the top spices. Rosh means the head spices, the top spices. So again, he's praising her fields, orchard of pomegranates, delicious fruits, all these fragrant spices, sugar, cinnamon, sweet, delicious stuff, myrrh and aloe, and all of the best spices are all growing in your fields over there. And then here, you ready, Cliff? Here it is for you. I think it's here. I think this is where Rashi makes the reference. Mayan Ganim, it is a spring of gardens, which I guess means it's like a wellspring that is watering all your gardens. Be'er mayim chayim, a well of living waters. V'nozelim min levanon, and it's flowing from Lebanon. Now, what exactly Lebanon refers to over here? Is it referring to okay, Rashi says over here, I needed to remind myself, he says Lebanon here, that it's flowing from Lebanon, meaning from the word Lavan, white, from the water is flowing from a place of purity and cleanliness, that the water is clear and pure and clean and not dirty and adulterated at all. So here's a praise of her fertile lands, fragrant spices, delicious fruits growing, and it's all growing from a clean, pure wellspring that is feeding all of this growth. Now, we have a couple minutes left, so let's finish up quickly in Rashi. What are these things, and what is the wellspring from which it originates? We might go a little over time, but if you have to go, go, and if not, forgive me. Forgive me anyway. So let's go quickly over here. Okay. So these dry lands, Rashi says, are filled with all types of goodness. Harehen melein kol tuv. They're filled with every types of goodness. Kefardes rimonim, like an orchard of pomegranates, and it represents v'zel shem ketanim shabi Yisrael. Listen to this. This orchard that's growing fruits. What are these fruits that are growing here? Ketanim shabi Yisrael, the Jewish children. This is the Jewish children. So we heard about the Jewish women, we heard about the Jewish men. Now here's the Jewish children. The Jewish children that are growing in the fields of, so to speak, of the Jewish nation are these delicious fruits. Martivin ma'asim tovim, they put forth fruitfully. Ma'asim tovim, good deeds. Ma'asim tovim, good deeds. Kefardes rimonim, like a orchard of pomegranates. Now, for those of you who weren't with us before, and those of you who were with us before, you might remember that we had many references to pomegranates in the Shir haShirim, and every time we had a reference to pomegranates, Rashi says, just as a pomegranate is full of seeds, so too is Israel, full of merits, full of good deeds, full of mitzvos, fulfillment of commandments. So the same imagery is being used over here, that the children who are being raised in the pastures, in the fields of the Jewish people, so to speak, are themselves, even in their youth, even in their smallness and innocentness, still full of good deeds, like an orchard of pomegranates, Okay, and we have all the fragrant spices, which Rashi doesn't elaborate on what they mean. They're just obviously some type of positive qualities that offer a pleasant fragrance to God, as it were. And we've had that imagery before. Rashi does not elaborate. And finally, we have the wellspring from which the source from which it arises, from which it's fed with water. And what is that wellspring? That Mayan Ganim, the spring of the gardens. He says it means this: Al Shem Tevilos Tohar, the dippings of purity, the immersions of purity, Shebenos Yisrael Tovlos, that Jewish women immerse themselves, obviously meaning in a mikvah, which is a be'er mayim chayim, it's a well of living waters. We know that the waters of a mikvah, the ritual bath of purity of the Jews, is collected from rainwater, or it could be water that flows directly from a stream. It can't be water that was poured. It has to be water that collects naturally or flows naturally. So it's the living water, and that living water is what a Jewish woman uses to immerse, to bring purity to herself. From there, she comes in her purity to join in intimacy with her husband in purity, and from there derives children that are conceived in purity. And from this pure conception comes the beautiful deeds from the children into the world. And it's 9:00. I'm shocked we got this far, because we covered many verses tonight. Maybe 6 verses. What did we cover? 6 verses? 5, 6 verses? There's one more verse in the chapter, and I'm like, can't we just finish it? But we're really at the end of time, so we'll have to finish off chapter 4 next week, God willing. I'm going to pause here, and I'm going to take questions.
Go ahead.
So, any questions on either the Zoom stream or the StreamYard stream? if you want to speak up, now's your chance before we close it out.
Yasher koach. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Any questions, any thoughts, any comments?
Thank you, Rabbi. I would stick around. I just have to go to Daf Yomi. So
Go to Daf Yomi. Go,
Yeah.
get out of here. Thank you for coming. Come again, please. Amen.
Thank you.
This
You're
is
very
Steve.
welcome. What? Who's this? Who speaks? Steve, Dr. Deutsch. Yeah.
Steve Deutsch, yeah. So when we were talking about the three obstacles, or we were talking about the gate and the pools, and it occurred to me that they're potential guards against a danger or straying from, so that it's sort of as though the tznius that Rashi is referring to helps the Jewish people to stay on track, to not be lured into behaviors that would not be consistent with Torah. They each sort of like was an obstacle or a barrier. That's what I thought of first.
So, in other words, where I was looking at it kind of as a barrier to keep things out, it sounds like you were looking at it as a way to keep things in. In other words, not allowing what is good in this good space to penetrate outwards into a negative space, to keep in what should stay in, rather than move towards something negative, as opposed to keeping out that which doesn't belong inside. Is that what you're saying?
Right. Yes.
I hear it. It's very, very possible that is that is an additional meaning here. I accept that. Yeah, I like that.
Very interesting.
Okay.
Thank you.
I appreciate that
Very
comment.
much. Take care. I wanted to ask you, maybe this is not the best form, but I was just curious. We have potentially a conflict with timing of Mincha Maariv at BCMH.
Correct.
Will you move to do anything about that or not?
Okay, I will address this question here. In the past, when the time for Maariv has been, and Mincha has been during the regular class time, I've tried to adjust the time of the class to not conflict with it. However, the result of that has consistently been that people stopped coming to class because the time was no longer convenient, whether it was earlier or later. We lost people and we diminished the amount of learning that was happening. As this time of the year rolled around again, I had the dilemma of, do I move the class? Do I not move the class? And I asked a shaila of a person whose view on the matter I think is expert. And I said, is it justifiable for me to daven without a minyan in order to maintain the time of the class and keep maximum attendance? And I was told yes. I was told to maintain the class when it is, and at the sacrifice of my own ability to attend a minyan. It so happens that most of the attendees of the class have not been regularly attending services, so it didn't affect anyone other than me pretty much. But that was the answer that I got. And I was also told another nugget of information, which helps, is that the Kollel will be resuming 9 o'clock Maariv at some close future date. So in other words, at least Maariv can be salvaged at 9 o'clock at the end of the class. In other words, I guess you'd have to be present in the Kollel already, which means maybe we'll have the class live, possibly. Start doing that, or you could Zoom on your computer from within the Kollel building and then walk over to Maariv. For myself, I'm able to daven mincha at TDS during the day, so I can catch mincha. I miss Maariv presently, but I'm told that that late Marav will resume, so I won't have to be giving that up consistently. But as far as the regularity of the class, I was advised to maintain the regular time.
I think that was obviously very good advice, because once you start varying times like that, it's very hard for people to stay consistent.
Right. So I would say this, for a person who wants to attend a minyan and that conflicts with the class, I would say go to minyan, but catch the replay, because the classes are recorded. So, that's it helps for those individuals.
And maybe you could suggest that they let you know that they watch the recording, just to see how badly it's affecting your attendance.
I mean, I'll see who comes and who doesn't come. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So after that, each person's responsible if they want to keep up with the class. I'm not twisting anybody's arm.
Sure.
So that's it. That's tonight's class. We're at the cusp of finishing chapter 4. It's very exciting. And have a great week.
You as well. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Okay, YouTube world. Somebody commented. Awesome. At 8:39. I just seen this comment now. Put it on the screen. Hey, check it out. Playing with StreamYards all by myself. I still have a few viewers yet on YouTube. So, if you guys wanna comment, it looks like I can see the comments in the chat to some degree. Okay. Otherwise, I appreciate anyone who came tonight and learned with me. Us. I'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.